I'm gonna see how this zoomed in position works because these models are so tiny that you can hardly see what I'm doing. So I'll try to keep in the frame. But now I'm going on to the second coat on the front of the shell. Just mixing paint off on the side here. All right, so I'll let that dry, but in the meantime, I'm going to get started with the back of his shell. Just takes me a minute to kind of mix the colors that I want because the brown that comes out of the bottle is too dark. And like I said, any color that you paint on wet is always about 2 shades lighter than it is when it dries. So I kind of like to err on the side of too light rather than too dark. I'm just gonna add some water to the paint, make it more of a wash until I get the hue and tone that I like. Let's see. Actually, I need more water. It's not really spreading. The paint's not spreading very well. So I'm just going to simply add a little bit more water to the mixture. And as I said before in other videos, this paint has a tendency to dry extremely quickly. I know people will buy actual, what are they called? Mediums to help keep the paint from drying, but I prefer just to use water. And you should paint with the largest brush that you can get away with and still have good control of the paint. And you can always move to a smaller brush later for the details. I'm still just kind of struggling with thinning the pigment. Oops. When you're painting a model this small, paint will get where you don't want it to go. It's just kind of an inevitable problem. The key is just to not panic about it. And if the two colors are going to be close together, so like that little swatch of paint that I got on his outer shell, I'm not going to remove it because painting over it is going to be easy. But if the colors were, say, white and black, and I got black on a white area, I would take a dry brush and dip it in alcohol and just kind of dab the spot to remove it, rather than add a bunch of layers of paint to cover up the error. But like I said, in this case, with the outer shell being similar in shade to the outer portion of the shell, there's no need to really try to remove it. I'm just trying to thin out this coat. Okay, and now since we have more than one area happening, I'm going to let the back shell dry and go back into the belly. Actually, here, let me show you, because now I have a bunch of, I just saw where I got the brown on his tail, and I'm going to take a dry brush and dip it in alcohol and clean that area up. So just to show you real quick, area I'm talking about is right there. Make sure you can see it right there. So I'm just going to take this and go along there. There, good as new, like a magic eraser. All right, now back to the front of his shell. I'm just kind of patting down and smoothing the the paint. Okay, and that is looking pretty good. And then I think we can turn him around and add another coat to the outer shell. All right, now I'm going to mix up some color and start getting the outer rim of the shell. All right, I've mixed up my color and I'm going to start on the outer rim of the shell. And in painting, it helps to steady the brush if you don't have a steady grip. If you kind of mount your forearm and don't paint with your hand, paint with your wrist. And that kind of keeps a steady pressure and consistency on the brush as you apply your paint. And make sure you remember to breathe. I think it's a natural tendency when you're painting small detailed areas to hold your breath. And you shouldn't have to be pressing hard with your brush. The brush should move seamlessly along the contours, and that helps keep your work neat. And I find that adding water to keep the consistency of the paint the same, you won't feel tempted to press hard with the paintbrush. But do whatever works for you. I mean, this is just a hobby for me. I am by no means considered a professional miniature painter. In fact, it's not even my job. It's just a hobby of mine. So do what works for you. And you'll get the hang of it eventually. I know when I first started painting miniatures, I became very discouraged because I was using the just regular cheap craft paints that I use to paint rocks and such, and that is just not a good way to paint miniatures. It's almost impossible to control the texture of the paint, and I find that in the cheap bottled craft paints, they don't have a lot of pigment, so thinning them out with water just makes them look like watercolors, and they have next to no coverage, meaning that you inevitably have to put a bunch of layers, and then that creates another problem because then you have paint on top of paint on top of paint, and you end up with, you know, gooey, gummy paint, and the finished product is far from pleasing. I don't even know if I have any examples to show you. I've pretty much thrown out all of my early work just because it was pissing me off so much. That, and it was taking me 10 times longer to paint, and when something's taking you that long and you're having to put in so much effort and then the outcome isn't even acceptable, it just really gets you down and makes you want to quit. But I actually changed my painting techniques, but mainly the key was to buying paints that are actually intended for miniature models. So if you're not already painting with model paint, I would suggest you do so. Okay, so I think we got a good thing going with Squirtle's shell, and I got a little bit of the rolled edge color on his skin, but I can easily cover that up, and in fact I'll probably go over it with a little bit of alcohol. So next would be, let's see, yeah, so I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to grab some glue and touch him up a little bit. Okay. It's hard. I'm trying to paint at an angle that you all can see. It's like Twister. I'm just kind of blending that into the rest of the shell. All right, that's pretty good. And this is what happens when you paint with alcohol, because this area right here does not quite, have clear, it doesn't have even color. You can actually see the undercoat peeking through from when I cleaned the brownish color off of the tail. So it's just going to require a few more layers than the rest of the shell to get the intensity back. All right, and now I'm going to go back into the rolled edge and just kind of seam up that transition.